you, Peter.
Caroline, thank you very much. Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to get some housekeeping out of the way if I can, right? Again, I want to thank Caroline for the opportunity. It's very, very kind of you. It's great to be in Galway. Every time I'm up here, I kind of, even if it's only for an hour or two, actually feel I'm on my holidays. I also want to thank my colleague here, Vincent Power. Vincent and myself, believe it or not, are from the same area in Limerick on the North Circular Road. We live literally, we're living within a quarter of a mile of each other. And Vincent connected with me last year, and all I can say is that the difference that Vincent has made to the type of work I'm trying to put out, and as well as this and future projects, which Vincent will talk about in a minute, it's day and night. He has made a huge difference and he's brought an awful lot to the party. So Vincent, thank you very much. Okay, next slide here. Again, file it under housekeeping. I run a YouTube channel. It's called Pete's World. The channel is free to subscribe, and all of what we're talking about, you'll find it on the YouTube channel. So just make sure you subscribe. It'll cost you nothing, and hit lots of likes because it helps the algorithm. If you click on the button that says videos, it'll put everything into chronological order. So you can see it. It's not all to do with this, but it's a lot of it, okay? So that's the best way to access it. And again, it's totally free of charge. You're welcome to jump on there. As Caroline was saying, the book I brought out last year is called Falling Stars. And originally, the book was only covering 5 major crashes at Shannon between 1946 and 1961. And as the book rolled out, which kind of surprised me at the numbers it sold, and as the supporting documentaries came out, I started to get more and more emails from people in Galway saying, look, we understand that the book is got the Shannon focus, but do you know anything about the 1958 Hugo de Groot crash? So it was with that in mind that as subsequent editions of the book came out, that I decided that it would be kind of timely, I suppose, to add in a chapter on the Hugo de Groot, which is not alone is it a very sad incident, but it's also a very interesting incident as well. Just to put you in the historical time frame of 1958, the EEC, predecessor to the European Union, started. Nikita Khrushchev became Premier of the Soviet Union. Charles de Gaulle elected French president. It was the very start of NASA's manned space program. It was called Mercury. They didn't put somebody in orbit until 2 years after that, 3 years after that. Ireland was admitted to the UN, so it was a very different world back then. So there was something that will come up here in a minute. There was the merger of an alliance between Egypt and Syria, but we'll come across that in a minute. So the story of this, starts out at Schiphol Airport. KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines, everybody has heard of KLM. They're now in an alliance for the last couple of years with Air France. But it was a truly enormous airline based in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. They had a huge route network, and obviously with the Netherlands being a former have colonies in the Far East, they had a lot of interest in maintaining routes out there. So the thing about KLM is that they were the first airline in the world to fly transatlantic service after World War II. They were first, ahead of the Americans. So this is a view of Schiphol Airport in the 50s. You can see it's from the control tower. The ramp is very busy with Constellations and DC-6s. They even had their own logo. The airline was founded by this guy. His name was Albert Plesman. I'm not sure if my pronunciation is quite on the numbers, but he started this in the 1930s. And from all accounts, he was kind of ruled it with an iron grip. He was a very authoritarian character. Shannon Airport in the 50s was a very, very different place than what it is today. A lot of the buildings were kind of ramshackle, kind of wooden structures. The control tower, which you see there, that's the second control tower in Shannon. The first one was on the very same site. It was made of wood and it was burnt down in the late 1940s. But on the right, it's a scene typical of this time frame. Very few buildings in the background. And as you can see, it's all wooden structures. And you see the old cars in front of it. I found this, I didn't find it. I was given this photograph last year. I thought it was very interesting. The photograph was taken in 1960, which is 2 years before the event that we're just talking about. And you can see up here at the top, that's the modern runway. If you take a Ryanair flight to Lanzarote, you're going to take off on that, or to London, whatever. That's known as runway 0624. And there's a connection to that runway and Vincent's father, but I won't go into it at the moment. So you can see the older runways, they're a darker colour. The new runway at that stage was just inaugurated. And again, the airport was a very, very different place back then. But the key difference between back then and now, it was a much busier place. And the reason Shannon was much busier was because of the range of the aircraft. The airplanes going west had to refuel in Shannon to make it to Gander. They didn't even go directly to New York. They had to pull into Gander, refuel in Gander to go to New York. And it was the same situation coming east. They'd leave New York, fly to Gander, top their tanks up, and come across the Atlantic. Okay, the book Falling Stars documents a picture of the 40s, 50s and early 60s of a lot of crashes taking place with a lot of airlines. But of all of the airlines that suffered accidents in this time frame, unfortunately KLM were top of the league. They had an extraordinary number of crashes. This takes you between 1948 and 1958 alone with KLM. I've actually forgotten one. There was another one in 1949 off the coast of Bari in southeast Italy. So they were plagued by crashes. They had a phenomenal number of them. We're going to roll the clock back, not to 1958, but to 1954. I just want to skim across this one. I don't want to get bogged down in this. There was another KLM crash at Shannon Airport. It was a nighttime crash. The airplane was called the Triton. It was a Lockheed Constellation, a Super Constellation. The guy on the left is the pilot. His name was Adrian Verrioli, and he was the most senior pilot in KLM at the time. And he was given the accolade of Commodore, exactly, Vincent, Commodore of the fleet. There was this kind of maritime accolade that was given to him. Such was his seniority. There he is outside, pictured outside of DC6. As I said, I don't want to get stuck in this because we're talking about the Hugo de Groot, but right now, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the actor John Travolta, through his company Constellation Productions, has purchased an old Lockheed Constellation with a view to making a film. Now, I've said this to Vincent a few weeks ago, and we were speculating, is the film that he's intending to make this? Because the story is so bizarre, you couldn't make it up. And it has got all of the elements.
There's amazing dimensions to it. It's shocked, really.
It's an extraordinary story. And straight away, when I heard that Travolta had bought the Constellation, I said to Vincent, I bet he's going to run with our idea and we're going to get shafted for not getting a finder's fee. But I'll let you, through the YouTube channel, investigate that. What went on was, as I said, you couldn't make it up.
A very quick aside, again, a very quick aside, again, not to get bogged down into it, a very quick aside, is that what you're looking at there is this crippled plane broken in the water. But that water is beside Shannon Airport. It's like less than half a mile. They can see the lights of the airport. But the extraordinary part of it was that in the middle of the night, broken and lying slumped on the water. Nobody missed them. Nobody knew they were there. Through a series of, I suppose, cock-ups really and equipment failures in the airport and in the tower. Nobody knew they were there. So they were left to their own devices to try to rescue themselves. But again, not to get too detailed in it, but one man actually jumped from a life raft. One of the flight crew, a navigator, one of the pilots, jumped from a life raft into the water and swam to the shore, which wasn't that far away. It was covered in, it's a mud bank, so he was covered in mud. And he walked into the airport in the middle of the night covered in mud, saying he'd just come from, and nobody knew anyway, it's another story, but.
It is another story. The last thing I'll say about the Triton is the reason it's got this Hollywood potential is because it's not just one story. There's a whole series of stories and interactions. So the best thing you can do is buy the book, of course. I've called this slide, The Curse of the Flying Dutchman. In the 1940s and the 1950s, all of the fleet of a KLM had a logo just above or to the side of the door as you get onto the aircraft. And the logo was this, it was the legend of the Flying Dutchman. Now, I don't know, have you heard of this kind of story? Have you ever come across it? Okay, it had to do with, again, referring to the colonies of the Netherlands, a sea captain back in the days of schooners and galleons, Captain van der Decken, who was coming with a huge cargo of spices, coming through the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa and encountering extremely inclement weather. And his crew became very nervous and they pleaded with him to make for Cape Town, the shelter of Cape Town. And he wasn't buying into it and he was literally cursing the elements. And the curse came back on him. He as the legend goes, he never found port. He was condemned to roam the world's oceans forever. And the legend goes on that anybody that ever came across the Flying Dutchman, if you saw it in the distance, that the curse would, like a tar baby, stick to you and you'd have a run of bad luck. But that was the legend. This is the airplane itself, okay? It was a Lockheed Super Constellation 1049. I just point out something here. Big fire extinguisher. Engines used to produce an awful lot of flames, okay? So this was a development of the Constellation. Like the DC-4, the DC-6, everything was developed in the 40s and the 50s. It was this incremental approach. And this had fuel pods on the wings and a weather radar. So it was more sophisticated than the one before it, with the fuselages stretched. This is the captain of the Hugo de Groot, 36 years of age. His name was Frico Rolofs. My Dutch isn't great now, but that's how I pronounce it, okay? So fairly young guy, 36 years of age. A lot of airlines bought Constellations in the 40s and the 50s, and it certainly had its fan club, but I would say KLM had more of an obsession with Constellation than any other aircraft. So they went through every single model of the Constellation from the very early 049 all the way up to the Starliner, the 1649. So if Lockheed produced it, they'd buy it. Okay. So Hugo de Groot, the Constellation that we're talking about was a H model, H for hotel, and they only had 3 of that particular model. So what they did, the Lockheed company took the wings of a civilian Constellation and they married that to the fuselage of a military version. The fuselage had a large cargo door at the back of it, which means that the airline in its low season could convert the airplane from passenger to freight only, literally in an hour. You just slide out the sections of seats. They were all on a reinforced floor with kind of ball bearings. So it's very easy to convert it. But there were 3 of this particular model. The second one was called Erasmus. The third one was named after a botanist, a Dutch botanist. I can't even pronounce his name. But Hugo de Groot was a famous Dutch statesman, poet, and a philosopher. So the early KLM Constellations were named after towns, and the middle ones were named after scientific principles like proton, neutron. So they had this funny naming convention. The slides might be slightly out of order here, but this is the crash site of the Hugo de Groot. The diagram on the left came from a Dutch newspaper. So it left Shannon at 3 o'clock in the morning, And as Vincent will tell you, there's one of the strangest things I discovered in all of the research that I've done on these crashes, and we're talking about nearly 350 people who lost their lives in everything collectively. All of the crashes have the same thing in common, and that is 3 o'clock in the morning. They all were either coming into Shannon or leaving Shannon at 3 o'clock in the morning. This flight took off from Shannon. It had come from Schiphol. It was in Shannon for an hour. It was only one Irishman went on board. It was a guy from Castlebar. He was living in, I think, a place called Yonkers in New York. He came over to visit his nephew. It was in the summertime. It lashed rain. He got disillusioned with it. He got disillusioned with the relatives that he troubled himself to go back to meet. He was living in the States 20 years. He said to the nephew, "I'm out of here, I'm off." He changed his flight ticket to an earlier ticket, and it was on this flight. So he was the only Irishman caught up on this. This is the Slinehead Lighthouse. I don't know if you've ever been out there, but it is a very remote place. Now, the aircraft was to have flown to Gander, which is in Newfoundland. I flew in there once myself. I was on my way to Cuba, and at the time Aeroflot, Soviet airline, Russian airline, were operating in Shannon. I was in the aircraft trading business, and I found myself on board a big wide-body Aviation 86. And I gave my business card to the hostess, and I said, I'd love to see what it's like up the sharp end, you know. And she came back, she said, 5 minutes. So she came back, she said, "Come on this way, Mr. McGarry." Went up to the front end of it, and she said to me, "Would you like your meal here?" So I said, "Yeah, it looks good to me." There was no fewer than 6 people flying the aircraft, so it was very electromechanical. 2 flight engineers, a guy sitting between the navigator, very intensive. And so I had my lunch, and the captain said to me, "Do you want to sit into the left-hand seat?" And I thought, do I what? It was an incredible experience in 1990. But we flew into Gander, and that airplane had to refuel in Gander because the old Kuznetsov engines, now the range, there weren't enough of a bypass ratio on that. We flew into Gander, I think it was in January, and there was nothing. It was like a white sheet in front of us, and put that airplane down on the ground absolutely perfectly. We all got off, the airplane refueled, then we flew out to Havana. An incredible experience. This little boat is going to come into the story in a minute. This is the original Nave Aina, the Iron Island ferry. Now, that photograph, I think, was taken up in Dublin. I'm just going to get some water here. The photograph was taken up in Dublin, and that boat has since been broken up. But they somehow, on a request from Galwegians, they got a blowtorch and they took the first 3 or 4 feet of it and they shipped it to Galway as some kind of a souvenir. But that was certainly involved in the recovery. So 40 minutes after the airplane took off, over the course of the 40 minutes, there was one radio message. It was Shannon asking the Hugo de Groot to relay a message to an overhead TWA flight. That was the last time they spoke. The next call was to have come in at 10 to 4 in the morning, and it would have been KLM requesting another flight level, okay? So that never happened. And 15 minutes after that time lapsed, for that radio message to come through, the lights started ringing in Shannon, and they couldn't get a response from other traffic, and they decided to enact or get our friends in Britain involved, the RAF, the Royal Air Force. So 3 Avro Shackletons, which was a Marine Patrol submarine hunter aircraft. They flew from Lossiemouth in Scotland to Shannon. They refueled in Shannon and started the search. It was the RAF that spotted the the wreckage first, okay? So they spotted it, but there was 3 French fishing trawlers in the area at the time, the Jules Verne, the Besant, and General Leclerc. And it was the Jules Verne that, unfortunately, there was 99 people on board the aircraft. What they discovered was, I'll try to say it as delicately as I can, it was 34 part member bodies, okay, including 1 child. And the child will come into play in a minute. Again, there's Sline Heads. You can see the coastline up there is incredibly, you probably know this better than I do, because Clifton was over there, I think, if that's correct. So a very, very rugged coastline. The first theory that they came up with was that of a terrorist attack. And at the time, the King Faisal II of Iraq was assassinated, and they hung him up in public, okay? He was only 23 at the time. And this had to do with an alliance that was forming between Iraq and Jordan. A similar alliance had happened between Egypt and Syria. But there were elements within the Iraq military that weren't comfortable with this, so they decided to eradicate him. But they thought somehow initially that was a terrorist bomb, and that's what brought it down. That was the queen-to-be of Faisal II, okay? But as soon as they discovered the part member bodies coming ashore, there was 2 Dutch KLM doctors that flew in, that the theory of a bomb was put to bed very, very quickly, okay? So again, there's the H model of the Constellation. You can see the cargo door at the back. So the investigation started to swing towards this. This is the type of engine you'd find on the Constellation. It's a Wright Cyclone 3350. Big 18-cylinder supercharged thing. Can be quite problematic. It's as far as you could take piston engines before jets arrived. Jets started arriving about a year after this. So there were a number of instances within KLM of propeller blade separations. In other words, the propeller comes off, one of the 3 blades comes off and causes havoc. The previous incidents, nobody was killed, okay? There were no fatalities. And there were other airlines worldwide that were experiencing something similar, and it had to do with metal particles coming from the supercharger into the oil lines and into a thing called a regulator, which maintained, it was like a governor for the speed of the propeller. So if the propeller oversped, it would just shift like a missile with centrifugal force and probably slice through the cabin, severing all control cables. And the other factor as well is that we said that there was no radio call from the Hugo de Groot at the time. So the theory was that in addition to severing cables and it being a very sudden event, it also severed the radio communication. So that was why there was nothing from it, okay? Of the 34 bodies that were landed at Galway docks, 3 of them were male, wearing wristwatches, and all of the wristwatches were stopped at between 5 and 10 minutes ahead of the expected radio call at 10 to 4. So the investigators were starting to get a handle on the timing of this and how long it was in the air before this thing happened. Now, I did say that one of the victims that was brought on shore was a child, okay, and we already have the kind of the principle of Occam's razor, that very often when you've got multiple possible reasons to explain something, it's the simplest reason is probably the correct one. So they were, without firm evidence, they were working on this. Now remember, there was no diving technology at the time. They couldn't have gone down, and even if they could have, there was no black boxes on the aircraft. There was no cockpit voice recorder. Stuff like that didn't happen until the 60s. We're well into the 60s before that came. One of them was a boy. It was the body of a boy that was brought in on the Jules Verne trawler. And the body of the child had an inflated life jacket. So that kind of beggared the question, how could you how could you have an event happening that rapidly, that wiped them all out, and have enough time to put the life jacket on the child? And there was other evidence that was starting to accumulate about the original theory of a very sudden, catastrophic accident not being such a solid theory. There was 3 life rafts on board a Lockheed Constellation. They found all 3 of them partly inflated. So if the airplane nosedives into the sea at 200 miles an hour and is blown to atoms, how could this happen? How could you get the life belt on the child and have the life rafts inflated? So, some newspaper cuttings from around the time, okay? So as I said, there was 99 on board. There was a fencing team. There was an American church who had gone to Germany to attend this already. Myself and Vincent passed it on the way in. We said, that's a cemetery. They're buried at Bohermore. So as I said, there was 34 part member bodies found. There's 22 interred in Bohermore. There was 12 that were repatriated to the Netherlands. And the reason they were repatriated was through the work of a Galway dentist. And I haven't got his name. There's a picture of the skipper of the French trawler and relatives waiting on any news. Again, newspaper coverage was absolutely worldwide. Galway docks, again, Bohermore. It was the largest funeral ever to take place in Galway, and in excess of 10,000 people literally lined the streets. I'm going to talk about this lovely lady. Her name is Nurse Catherine Dempsey. Her married name was Keane. And as I said, I was getting emails from Galway, just watching the time, but people asking me, would I do the Hugo de Groot and put it into the book? So this chap, very nice guy, rang me one day. He said, look, I want to send you a picture of my mother who had died just a few months before that. And she was one of 2 nurses that was brought down onto the quays, and what they did was, as the trawler was coming in, they set up a tent with refrigeration capabilities to sort out the part member bodies and let the forensics, as forensics existed back then, do their work. But this lady was from Loughrea, and she was down at the quays and used to tell her sons and daughters about the story all through their lives. So it was kind of part of the family folklore, and she used to describe it, and you'll see it in the film. She had a bizarre way of describing what she was doing for the 2 or 3 days. She called it jigsaws. She was making jigsaws. And unfortunately, one of the jigsaws she made was of that stewardess. So after I think his name was Mike Dempsey, contacted me. He said there's a strange aspect to the story. Is their mother was 93 when she died. Catherine lived to 93, and they saw her off the normal funeral, and just as we were leaving the cemetery, this appeared. You notice the truck? De Groot. Which is a very, very bizarre coincidence, I think. Kind of sent shivers down their spines. A whole load of dignity. Sorry?
Where was the policeman taken?
I'm not sure. It might be in the county somewhere. I did mention that KLM sent 2 medical doctors over. They sent translators over. KLM Constellation, another H model, arrived into Shannon a couple of days after. The whole aircraft was full of flowers in KLM colours. So the whole of Bohermore graveyard and the approaches to it were just covered in floral tributes. Now, I did say KLM have this hopefully had this bizarre accident track record, and you probably know this anyway. The single largest aircraft accident happened in 1977 in Tenerife, and it was at a place called Los Rodeos Airport. And the south of Tenerife is very mountainous. You've got Mount Teide, it's a volcano, highest peak in Europe, if you include it in Europe. The northern half of it has elevation as well. So the airport, Los Rodeos, is located on a shoulder between these two heights. This airport isn't used anymore for certain reasons. Okay, the airport is now Queen Juliana in the south. Queen Juliana Airport was just finishing construction in 1977. When this incident happened, it was a bomb strike in Las Palmas Airport in Gran Canaria, and because of the bomb strike, they diverted flights into this airport in Los Rodeos. And as I said, it's in the middle of two high mountain ranges, so it's prone to sea fog coming in. But this is the pilot.
Planes involved?
That's
Yeah,
right,
that's
yeah.
the one. When they crashed in the air.
Two
Yeah.
jumbo jets.
Yeah,
Yeah, I heard about it.
it was Pan American and KLM.
Yeah, it's shocking. Isn't it?
Shocking.
Yeah, so this is the skipper,
All human error.
Captain Van Zanten, I think. And KLM had changed there was a whole series of reasons behind the accident, Vincent. KLM had changed the rules on, as you probably already know, airline crew can only fly so long, cockpit crew, before they're pulled off and replaced with another crew. And he was worried that the delay in refueling on the ramp was going to impinge on this rule. You can get fired for it or jailed for it. So it is a fairly serious thing. They just changed the rule. So he was in a rush to take off. And there was a whole series of mix-ups. He got to the end of the runway. Pan Am started taxiing out. Didn't make a cut-off. Pan Am was to have turned here. So they got mixed up. Is it 3 or is it 4? So this guy started his takeoff. The co-pilot said, no, we haven't got clearance. It's not clear. And your man was just a certain streak of arrogance in him. He said, no. Put on the power and went straight into the Pan American aircraft. And everybody on board KLM was killed instantly. There were survivors in Pan Am, including the captain, who many years later, when he was interviewed, was still very bitter over the whole thing. It was close on 500 people, Vincent.
That's right, yeah.
As we said, a funny feeling that it just might be the project that Travolta is latched onto now, which is the 1954 Hugo de Groot crash. Okay, if you want to buy the book, there's my. Sorry for being so commercial. If you want to buy the book afterwards, 6 copies. Okay, if you do Revolut, it's there. I'm going to get my dear friend Vincent just to talk for a moment about the next project, which is called Rising Stars, and why we're doing that.
Yeah,
Okay. The next project, which is called Rising
Yeah.
Stars, and why we're doing that.
Yeah,
Okay.
good evening, everybody, and nice to see you all and be in Galway again. Always nice. My mum's from Galway, so it's in the blood. But my own background, by the way, is I'm retired after a long career as a journalist with the Irish Examiner and Evening Echo. But we have Galway roots, I should say. And our paths crossed there last year, as Peter was saying. I'm a fellow aviation enthusiast all my life. Done a lot of travelling over the years with my job as a journalist. But aviation has been in my blood since I was a kid, like a lot of young people, including Peter.
The connection to Concorde.
And the connection to Concord, that's another story. But I think growing up in Limerick, I'm giving away my age now, but not that young. But growing,
over 70,
thank you. But growing up in Limerick back in the 60s as a small boy, all small boys really, there wasn't a lot to do in terms of Sunday afternoon. So a Sunday afternoon at that time would be spent either in the cinema, going to the pictures, or driving out to Shannon Airport, which was glamorous and very exciting and opened a window into an exciting world for all of us as young boys, watching the aircraft coming and going. So that's where my interest in aviation was sparked all those years ago, stayed with me. But since our paths have crossed, and I suppose I've said it before, but it's worth saying again, I was quite impressed when I met Peter because of literally a powerhouse amount of research and work he has done on the airline crashes in Shannon that spanned that period in the 40s and 50s, which he's chronicled in that book, Falling Stars. I wasn't aware, like a lot of people, I wasn't aware of the sheer scale of those, that there had been so many crashes. Certainly younger generations today, including my own grown-up children, who hop on and off planes so casually and hop on and off Ryanair flights in Shannon and just take flying completely for granted. I think they have no concept. My kids certainly didn't know, and I think a lot of children, younger generation, don't know the background of what happened in Shannon Airport and the tragedy and heartbreak and carnage that had occurred literally on our doorstep. So I think Peter has, I think, done a very, very valuable service in opening a window into that particular chapter of Shannon Airport's admittedly sad history. We have decided to cooperate and collaborate on a new project and on a new book. It did strike me in conversations with Peter that while this is very worthwhile and it's actually history, and history has been written in that book, there is another dimension to the story of aviation too, which I've been fascinated about, and Peter, which is not really the heartbreak or the sadness, but the other side of the story, which is excitement and glamour and fun, which happened as part of the growth of aviation down right back to the 30s. And I think it's a story well worth telling as well. I think, again, a lot of people, especially the younger generation today, we're talking about maybe the budget airlines again, are probably more used to, getting from A to B as cheap as possible, even if you are squashed into a seat for an hour and bear the journey. There was a whole different side of aviation before the budget airlines came along, and this is the glamour, the fun, the excitement, and the luxury. Nobody slummed it. Nobody was eating a packet of crisps and a packet of pretzels and a cup of tea and coffee in a paper cup. Far from it, actually. You're talking about a serious luxury, expensive, and you paid for it. But the period we're looking at in terms of talking about the glamour and they call it the glory days of aviation, you're looking at from a time frame probably we're looking at it from the mid 30s right through up to 1970, 71 and the arrival of the Boeing Jumbo, the big jumbo jet. So that whole period of time, it covers beginning in the 30s with what they call the flying boats. Again, a lot of younger generation today wouldn't know what a flying boat is. But a flying boat was a sort of a weird, odd kind of hybrid between a plane and a boat, which could actually travel the world without any airports and without any runways, because it could land on water. So flying boats began to cross the Atlantic and the Pacific as well, through a number of different manufacturers who made these flying boats. The best known manufacturer probably would be Boeing, actually. But on our doorstep, the Atlantic Ocean was opened up. This was at a time when if you wanted to cross the Atlantic, you went on luxury liners, which if you could afford it and if you were lucky, if you wanted to cross the Atlantic. Flying boats cut that journey down. It was still a very long journey. Crossing the Atlantic in a flying boat took 18, 20 hours an overnight. But again, in keeping with, I suppose, the theme of what we're researching and writing about in this next book, which will be called Rising Stars, I suppose a counterpoint to Falling Stars. It'll be Rising Stars. But crossing the Atlantic in flying boats, on a very long flight, it sounds pretty bumpy and pretty uncomfortable. It was far from it, actually. It was the epitome of luxury. It was all one class. There was no class division. Fares were terribly expensive. In today's terms, a return flight across the Atlantic would be, you're looking at about $20,000 and 18,000 euros. It didn't come cheap. But what you got for that?
The big operator,
well,
American, was
the main airline that was operating that route, which actually spearheaded and opened up that route, was Pan Am.
And this is where the timing of this book literally fell into our lap, because Vincent said to me, look, we should do this book as a kind of an antidote to the melancholy nature of the Falling Stars. And he said, yeah, we should call it Rising Stars and it'll be a feel-good book. So we started talking about Pan Am, and we literally only decided to write this book jointly. And we spotted an announcement from Criterion Travel, which is a very, very large, exclusive British travel group, that Pan Am, lo and behold, is back in Shannon. Not once, but twice next year.
Because Pan Am closed down. It went out of business in 1990.
It's gone 30 odd years.
Yeah.
So We thought the timing of this, something has landed on our shoulders that's telling us to do this book. And the book is kind of capturing the feel-good factor of that, and it so happens that after making connections, it looks like we're going to be working with this, inverted commas, Pan Am and Criterion. So we're hoping that next year is
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah,
be pretty good.
it's coincidentally
And we sell books
just
in the
happening.
book, yeah.
But yeah, anyway, that's the whole point and the whole purpose of what we're doing, and we'd be delighted to come back here anytime and share it with you. As I said, we're beginning with the flying boats, which goes right into what we're looking at here, is the piston propeller planes, which we right through into the 40s, 50s, late 50s, then into the arrival of the jet age, and again, particularly with one airplane in particular. Again, it's a Pan Am plane. It just
The Pan Am flight next
Yeah.
year starts in New York. It goes to Bermuda, goes into the Azores, it goes to Lisbon,
Yeah.
Marseille.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that particular flight, it's a very expensive flight. The cost if you want to travel on that is $60,000. It's a 12-day trip, staying in luxury hotels, including luxury hotel in Ireland in Dromoland Castle. Expensive trip, but you think what you're saying there, Peter, is that what they're doing, which is very historic again, they're retracing the route, the exact route on the northern side and on the southern side of the old flying boat routes. So it's kind of symbolic, I suppose, and historic what they're doing. But it'll be a jolly trip if you can afford it.
One for everyone.
So in our book, we're going to be going right into, as I said, right up into the jet age, and then of course the arrival of the Boeing 747, which was absolutely, for me, it was absolutely, and Peter, was astonishing to see. I got my first glimpse of the jumbo jet in Shannon Airport. I was about 10 or 11 at the time, I think, when Aer Lingus got its first jumbo jet, which is called St. Colmcille, piloted by a very experienced pilot called Pete Little, who had been to Seattle Boeing headquarters and flew it back to Dublin, and then went on its maiden inaugural flight. So that was actually one of 3 Boeing 747s that Aer Lingus had. In fact, online, I've just looked the other day, saw a lovely picture at Shannon Airport of all three parked up together. It was St. Kieran, St. Colmcille, and the flagship was called St. Patrick. St. Patrick was a very special jumbo jet. That was special because it flew the Pope into Ireland and out of Ireland.
Tell you a funny story about the third one, okay? Sierra India.
St. Kieran, yeah.
And the last one was Echo Delta. Echo Delta was a Lufthansa machine. And I spent a summer in 1985 working at the airport. And any time that airplane was on the ramp, it was referred to as Hitler's Revenge because it just was always going technical.
It was giving trouble. Yeah.
Not everything German is reliable.
Yeah, in fact, just to finish with the Pope, when they flew the Pope on the St. Patrick, 2 pilots, first pilot flew him from Aer Lingus, flew him from Rome into Dublin, and then when he concluded his papal visit, he flew from Shannon to Chicago. They actually modified the 747, and of course, as you probably know, with the 747, you had that hump in the front. The hump on the front contained first class on the main level, but then there was a very distinctive spiral staircase. You went up a spiral staircase to the top of the hump, which in normal flight contained a lounge, cocktail lounge, and very nice lounge seating for first class passengers. For the Pope, they took all that out, and they actually installed a special bed for him, and a dining room table as well, and little flowers and a cross, and made it almost home from home. His Vatican in the sky. So he was well looked after, and so that's just a taster, a little flavour of what we're up to and how all this project has come about. And I hope you've enjoyed our few little words. And if there's any
questions, obviously.
Yeah, I'll pass the little mic around to you if any of you want to ask any. I'd be delighted to pass this around to you.
You said that lots of them
Just a second.
KLM flights, there were so many accidents and horrific consequences situations. What about, you mentioned Pan Am, like there would have less tragedies to happen back then in the time?
They were massive tragedy, of course. They had one, which contributed to the end of Pan Am. It was such a calamitous tragedy, which was Lockerbie in Scotland. A Pan Am 747 jet flying from London, bound for New York.
Do you know the name of the jet?
The name of the jet was called the Clipper Maid of the Seas. The Clipper, all their planes were called Clippers. Again, going back to the maritime tradition of Clippers, but all the planes, even the ones we've been speaking about earlier, but this particular one, 747, Clipper Maid of the Seas, to go from London bound for New York, flying over the village of Lockerbie in Scotland, blasted out of the sky by a terrorist bomb. Everybody, no survivors. In fact, people on the ground were killed as well. I mean, I can remember watching that on television, the story breaking. That was just incredible, heartbreaking to see such a huge. I mean, that plane would have been carrying over 400 people. To see it just taken down like that, it had a huge profound effect on the airline itself, and on Lockerbie itself, and the people of Scotland.
Devastating.
And this,
Sorry, beg your pardon.
yeah, this one, the Hugo de Groot crew, no survivors, yeah? Were there any survivors?
99 on board. Okay.
You said, yeah?
99 on board. There were no survivors in the Hugo de Groot. The 1954 crash that we were talking about earlier on, the Triton, okay, the one that we think may be becoming a movie, it was almost mathematical. There was 56 on board, exactly half died, 28, and the ones that died, unfortunately, were the ones in the back of the aircraft. And when it landed on the water, it broke its back. The back settled. It was on a mud reef, mud bank. It started to settle into the water. They survived initially, but the fuel tanks, the petrol tanks in the belly of the aircraft are ruptured. It's about number 5 tank. So it was a cocktail of either you were going to drown or choke to death.
Aviation fumes from. It was actually aviation fumes. It didn't. A lot of these crashes we're talking about previously exploded with fireballs, in Shannon. This one didn't explode, and people were still trapped in their seats. Within view of you could see the twinkling lights of the airport, but the fuel tanks ruptured and toxic poisonous aviation fuel filled the cabin, literally asphyxiated, choking. Particularly in the back of the plane, which ironically was where first class was located. And as well, the tide was in that Shannon estuary. It's tidal, so the tide was coming in and the water was rising. So it's a combination of them asphyxiated. But half of them did manage to survive by getting into the life rafts, which were on the plane, and trying to cross it was very difficult and very treacherous because it's all mud. You're talking in the middle of the night in darkness.
And here in Bohemond, are buried